Well, thank you very much for those wonderful introductions. I was counting the words to see if he got more words than I got, but I think it was about even. So this is a privilege. I just want you to know that at one time, Northrop Grumman Corporation was a small startup in Southern California by a guy who never finished college, Jack Northrop, and he had this idea of building airplanes that didn't have tails. It could be like flying wings, and eventually, of course, the B-2 bomber got built probably 70 years later. So welcome to everybody. My first question is a very important one, which is, how are you so successful given you actually graduated from Stanford?
Yeah,
you didn't drop out of Stanford.
Yeah, it's a little point of embarrassment, actually, in Silicon Valley to finish it. No, I think, I guess I'm very lucky to have grown up in Silicon Valley and be surrounded by a lot of smart people. So I think success in Silicon Valley, especially as an investor, is basically getting to take credit for like these really smart friends you meet through your friends. And so it's Palantir worked, I think, because I had a lot of the best people there, and I think everything else I've done, the stuff that works the best is when you get smart people to want to work with you.
So tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are right now, from your days graduating college. What motivated you? What made you think about the path you wanted to take?
Oh, thank you. We should be asking you about your success in the path. I appreciate it. I guess I was very lucky to be exposed to a lot of things that we kind of perceived to be very broken and needing to be fixed. And Silicon Valley technology, in our view, had gotten to be a lot more advanced than a lot of the technology in the rest of the world through a fluke, where a lot of the smartest people kind of went there. And so, given all the hard problems that were solved at Google, at PayPal, at these other companies, in the late '90s, we realized that the problems we solved there actually applied to lots of other industries and lots of other things that were broken. So we were able to kind of get people together and go after to fix those problems.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you earlier mentioned surrounding yourself with really smart people, mm-hmm. and being in the presence of smart people. You find that energizes you? Makes you take your game up a level?
Definitely, and also if they're not smart, it's the opposite.
Yeah. No, there's an old saying we had is that A players will get other A players to work for them, B players get C players, and C players beget morons. And so you really want to start with the A players.
Definitely found that to be the truth. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your current fund, 8VC. First of all, this is not a fruit juice. This is a real company. Right?
It's
how did it get the name?
8VC. Well, our first fund was called Formation 8, and I was working pretty closely with a friend of mine whose family built the LG conglomerate in Korea, and we were doing things between here and China, and we thought 8 was a lucky number. I like the number 8 it's actually, sure. In Judaism it's an important number too, but in China it's like a lucky number.
Yeah.
And so we were forming a lot of stuff, so we called it Formation 8, and then the teams ended up splitting up, and so 15 of the 25 people came with me for Fund 3, and we're still good friends with our Korean friends, but they're doing more in Asia now. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of took the 8 part of it, which I thought was a lucky part to keep on our side.
What are the sort of things you're looking at in 8VC? What are the kind of areas you're focusing your attention on?
Sure. Well, there's really two big themes that we've been focused on over the last 5 or 6 years. One of them is a theme that's been going on for a little longer, which is how information technology is transforming big industries. And so there's a lot of things that are possible in terms of new processes in government, in finance, in healthcare, where the better IT, the cloud technologies, what people call big data technologies, really help make these industries work better. And so we call this smart enterprise wave, which is a lot of it's replacing 30, 40-year-old systems for the first time. And that's a really big theme. I think that the other theme that we've done a lot more of, when you're looking in venture capital, you want to be focusing on what's possible now that was not possible 5 years ago. And so that you tend to have these waves, right? You can't build a new Uber right now. It doesn't make sense. There already was Uber, and there already were all these other companies trying to do that. And there's a certain few-year period where you could build Uber. There's a certain few-year period where you could have built a Google. We're not going to build a new Google right now. So the thing that we believe is now possible that was not possible 5 years ago is that a lot of biology and life science problems have become information problems. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things where you all of a sudden have information you didn't have about the microbiome, about genomics, about how all these things in biology work, and we're very excited about what's possible there.
Mm-hmm. So basically the major theme here is taking tech, which for a while was its own vertical where people invested, and applying it across every other kind of industry where tech was not the basic element, right?
Definitely, and I mean, so exactly. From a business perspective, we're not technology investors. We're fixing these businesses. From a VC perspective, though, there's certain rules about how you build great technology companies that still apply to no matter what industry you're doing these in. So the reason you don't have a lot of the best financial tech investors or health tech investors winning the top Series A's and B's is they're not necessarily exposed to the very top up-and-coming technologists. So we have that advantage. Like the top venture capital firms in Silicon Valley have people who've built these companies themselves, have founders and entrepreneurs who are kind of looked up to in the ecosystem. So we're able to get access to the very best up-and-coming engineers. But then from a business perspective, we have to kind of work with them within these other industries.
Mm-hmm. I had the privilege of spending half a day at Verily Life Sciences, which is the Google Life Sciences with Sergey Brin and Andy Conrad. And I was absolutely blown away by the convergence of not only life sciences people, but data science people.
Yep.
And the ability in the Valley to very rapidly deploy human capital and talent around problems very quickly. And people from other parts of the world come to see this and say, how do you do this here? Is this sort of a focus you have as your life sciences interests?
Yeah, no, I think it's very exciting what's going on with the life science IT stuff in Silicon Valley. And historically, I was always more bullish on Boston and the life science area. And the reason I think the Silicon Valley's really pulled ahead in the last 5 years is that because these things are information problems and because I think people in the Valley are able to organize around solving these problems very, very well. It's kind of what we do. So a lot of other parts of the world, including Boston, I have this very great academic perspective where you'll have this big life science breakthrough and you'll figure out how to build a company around it. But I think the way the Valley works a lot more is you'll have this problem that needs to be solved where we need to take this data. So we have a friend in the audience who runs a great microbiome company. You have to basically take the data from all these different samples and you have to correlate it with the results and you have to figure out there's a 99.99% chance of this based on this. And that's much more of like an engineering-driven information thing that we do, I think, very well in California.
So as you look at your portfolio in the biosciences area, are there one or two particular areas that appeal to you that you think could be places where there could be significant opportunity for return on investment?
Definitely, and it's always unclear if there's only going to be maybe one or two companies that completely dominate this. I mean, the funny thing about venture capital is that, as you know, there's like this power law of returns, and so you can do a lot of things in one area, and there's a good chance that one of those companies is going to be every other company combined in that area. When there is a moat, when there is a data moat. So, for example, there may only be like a few companies in the microbiome space that just completely dominate it because they have these data moats. But there probably are a lot of interesting problems to solve there. Similarly, with like the tools around CRISPR and the data around CRISPR and the solutions coming out of that, like we're very excited about a company in that space, and we think there's going to be a lot of people trying to do things there. But because of some data moats, maybe there'll only be a couple winners there too.
Mm-hmm. And how important do you think it is that there be government interest or support? Or is in fact that an opposite indication for you as you look at investing your money?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably like tied to our different views of politics and how the world works. But in my experience from Palantir and in my experience now, it's usually an opposite indicator. Usually the government gets involved with people who are very good at spending their time being friends with them as opposed to the people who are very good at solving the really hard problems. And so that tends to be my personal experience. And it was very, very difficult to get any grants at all for Palantir for years, even though it was clear we were hiring like the very best engineers in the world. We were competing with Facebook basically for people who would never even consider going to a lot of the competitors we were facing. And yet the government wasn't really able to figure that out for quite a long time. It was very frustrating.
Yeah, the central allocation of capital by politically elected officials often doesn't work. And you can see that time and time again. I was struck when one of my colleagues, Ash Carter, who was formerly Secretary of Defense in the previous administration, went out to Silicon Valley to tell everybody in Silicon Valley that they should work with the Department of Defense. And what he doesn't realize is like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You can't have the government defense establishment work with Silicon Valley without changing the state.
You would have loved to be there. I had a bunch of my friends who were CEOs of leading companies. And we had 3 of his DIUX officials. They were called at my house. Yeah. And they kept telling us how they were investing in these seed companies. And they were going to teach them how to work with the government. And we were just like lecturing them so hard they're all up against the wall, terrified, because they had no idea what they were doing. But
I get asked, as someone who spent 4 more decades in this business of national security, asked, how do I get my first government contract? And my recommendation is don't do that. You want your company to survive? Don't do that.
It's a tough area. Palantir was a very mission-driven company early on.
That's an exception. and a wonderful exception.
But even then, I think about 65% of the revenue now comes from the commercial space, and our growth's higher in commercial, even though we've done great work in government. It's very difficult.
Yeah, the core, for those who don't know, Palantir is a very important company for national security purposes, and probably one of the few counterexamples to what we talked about of a company that can actually operate in both spaces.
We probably would have made more money if we started in commercial, though, to be honest, except for the fact that the mission was inspiring.
But the mission is important, and thank you for the mission.
Yeah.
So let me switch gears for a few minutes, and so you've had an amazing run since your days at Stanford. Could you offer us some personal sense of your learning experiences? What do you think was your biggest success to date, and what was the biggest smack in the face you got that you may have not wanted to get, but you may have learned something from?
Well, I think the biggest smack in the face was when we were about 5 or 6 years into Palantir, and it was actually interesting. I was helping Peter build out this hedge fund that had gone pretty well for 5 or 6 years, and I think at this point we were about a $7 billion hedge fund, and I was 26 or 27 years old, and we were feeling pretty smart. We were up 75% midway through 08, having been short finance, and thought we'd figured everything out. And I think maybe I wasn't the only one guilty of this, but there's a few of us building that who thought we basically knew everything at that point and that we could do no wrong. And I think our attitudes got to be slightly less introspective about our own potential flaws. And we ended up trying to build a lot of things at once. And I think there's this saying that the Greeks had is that gods give great men pride in order to destroy them, and it's like a thing that always happens basically. Yeah. And so no matter if you start thinking you're great and you start thinking you're successful, you're going to get overconfident and you're going to get smacked across the face. And so what ended up happening is a couple of things I was building around the fund kind of blew up with some fights. The fund ended up down 4% for the year because we just totally screwed everything up, and a lot of people left. And with this Palantir thing we were launching in finance, just no one would return our calls, partially because it was a crisis, but we had a big blow up there. So it was and unfortunately I lost my mom that year too. So there's it was just a really tough year overall, and everything blew up, and it kind of showed me that you can think you're completely on top of the world and think you're a genius, and then suddenly everything is potentially broken. So you got to be really paranoid is my view of these things.
Yeah, Andy Grove lives, right? So, for most of us in the room who've been through a lot of these experiences, we hate going into them, but usually the saying, that which does not kill you makes you stronger, as long as you're introspective and honest with yourself about what it was that you did right, because you didn't do everything wrong, and you didn't obviously do everything right. So your takeaway is from all that.
Don't be an arrogant and overconfident person. And really, one of my rules now, and then people laugh, but it's a real rule. I only want to be responsible for the failure of one thing at a time. That's really important.
So a man's got to know his limitations. So just take on one thing you could screw up at a time. Yeah. And so on the other side here, Joe, what would be a success that you would share with this group that you are pretty proud of?
Sure. Well, I think I get there's a few companies that we've built that I'm very proud of, including Adapar and OpenGov. But I think Palantir is one where it was a very clear mission we set out. So we actually, what we did at the beginning of Palantir is we mapped out about 100 different government projects that were costed between $50 million to $3 billion, and they were IT services projects. And we said, why are these so expensive? Why do they take so long? And basically we said, if we could build something that could productize all of them, then we could put it out there and we could work with them to actually both protect civil liberties and catch the bad guys. And specifically at the time, it was about let's work with them to catch Osama bin Laden using this data-driven approach. So we ended up attracting a lot of really great people, and we actually did end up working with the team that took him down and took a lot of other people down while doing it in a way that was legal and was much more efficient. So I was very, very proud of what you could do. And everyone of course said we were completely crazy. It was 21, 22-year-olds who wanted to build this and do this. But over the next 5 or 6 years, we ended up achieving that, which was really neat.
So it's interesting. So a young man who's been extraordinarily successful financially, the one thing that he decided to mention is something that he did that made a huge difference for the mission, if you will, for the nation. And for civilized society. That's terrific. Joe, what advice would you give some of the entrepreneurs in this room? Some are young, some maybe not so young from what I can see. What one or two things might you suggest to them as they think about
Gosh, that's hard. There's a lot of people who've written a lot of good books on these things. I guess for me, you gotta make, I guess a couple of things. One is make sure you're you just remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing, and that you're really passionate about your mission. One of my favorite pieces of advice I got is I was like a pretty good chess player when I was young. I was state champion a couple times, and I meet all these top chess players now. We had Magnus Carlsen over the other day, who's much better, of course, than I ever would have been. And I asked him how he studied, because he studies like 50, 60 hours a week. And when I was young, I actually studied 30 hours a week for like 5, 6 years because I was focused on it. And I asked him, how do you do your homework? What do you focus on? He says his teacher gives him about 10 to 12 hours of homework each day, but he only focuses on the half of it that he's really interested in, and then he'll spend the whole time doing that. And I guess he does that because if he focuses on the part he's most interested in, then he just like learns much better and much faster. So it's only worth doing the part he's really passionate about. And I thought that kind of really spoke to a lot of things in the world, that the people who are the best in the world at things, like do the things they're passionate about, and they're focused, and they learn. Their brain just engages better because they really care about it and love it. And so I think that's like the most important thing, is like figure out what you're most passionate about, and just like engage and focus on that, and surround yourself with great people who can do the other parts.
There are theories out there that you need to spend 10,000 hours or so in any one thing to become really expert at it. And regression, now Malcolm Gladwell, of course, wrote this book, when you looked at people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, that in fact figured out that they spent about 10,000 hours in computer programming and that sort of thing before they became sudden overnight successes.
Yeah.
But it sounds like that's something that was their passion as well as something they could go deep on.
Yeah.
So they didn't kind of spread themselves like peanut butter.
It's definitely both. It's definitely both. I mean, just from the chess world and from the world of entrepreneurship, it's you really got to put in the time, no matter how smart you think you are. There's no such thing. I mean, Albert Einstein was good friends with Emmanuel Lasker, the world chess champion, and they'd play together. But Lasker spent like 10 times as much time on it, and was a much better player than he was.
Yeah, Einstein was thinking about other things that worked out later.
He probably wasn't as passionate just about chess.
Yeah, so that's good advice for entrepreneurs. Let me ask you the flip of that. What advice might you offer investors who are investing in tech space and in startups? What things might you share with them?
Sure. Well, I think from an investment perspective, the most important thing is all about following the very top talents and the top passionate people who are able to attract top talents around them. And this is the mistake I constantly see people outside of Silicon Valley making when they're investing in technology. Technology investing is all about the very top companies. You could have 10 things in your portfolio. There's going to be one that really matters that drives your returns, maybe 2 if you're lucky. And it's a very weird sort of thing. It's not at all like real estate or private equity or something where everything has to work. And it's good if everything works, but the very top matters. And to find the very top, you need to know where the top talent is going. Where are the very best people out of MIT, out of Stanford, out of Waterloo, out of the very top technology schools, Caltech being one around here. Like where are they going? Where are they excited to be? And it's for whatever reason, most groups outside of the Valley don't follow that very well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just a key thing to know.
So the talent, and this has been something that's been done for years and years. The successful people figure the teams they wanted to back less than the idea, right?
Yeah, I think it's just really important.
So what is the next big thing, or the next couple of big things that you see coming? Say a time frame of 3 to 5 years, maybe from now. Anything in your crystal ball that you think could be big that you might want to think about catching the wave?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think even though it's like already talked about a lot, I don't think it's well understood in terms of what's possible with CRISPR and what's possible with being able to do kind of A/B testing on changing genes and what happens. And I think there's a lot of really cool solutions coming there where you could just pick any specific area to study of the genome and of its impact, and just like learn that really well. And there's just so many diseases that are going to be cured in each of these areas. So I think teams of great computer scientists working off of the tools being built right now are going to cure a lot of diseases. You probably saw like Zuckerberg Chan initiative where they're putting a few $1 billion into these things, and I think it's just a great thing to be doing right now because that's something that's suddenly possible that was not possible 10 years ago. So I think that's one of the very biggest that I'm passionate about. I think another area that's coming that's quite cool is the whole augmented reality stuff. I think will finally get to be pretty big. I'm not really investing in it much yet. We were in Oculus early on in our fund because we thought that was a really good example of virtual reality working for the first time. And I think it's still, the space is still early, but I think augmented reality will be like the new interface that we'll all be using. And if you think of like what's the interface after the mobile phone, and I don't know if it's 3 years or 10 years, but it's very important.
Those are two good ideas. So I'm an investor. What are the things I better watch out about that everyone thinks are hot that are probably going to lose steam, and I better worry about cutting my losses, even though the herd's going there?
Yeah, well, I think AI is really crowded right now. Everyone's especially with people coming from China. They're like, Joe, I'm interested in AI and machine learning, and I have $100 million checks to write, and can you show me where I should put $100 million into machine learning? And it's like, it makes me a little bit nervous. Machine learning itself is not what's valuable. What's valuable is that all these industries have data that's like hasn't really been brought together in one place, and that still has to happen in most of these industries. It's not a really hard problem. If you could tell me exactly where all the trucks are and who's driving them and what stuff that there is to be picked up, I could help you optimize your trucking thing better. It's not a hard machine learning problem. I could do it with an engineer or two if the data was all there. The hard problem in all these industries is getting all the data there in a clean way and figuring out how to do that. And so we're still a lot more backwards than people realize. They're trying to invest in these really cool sounding advanced things, but first you just need to kind of fix the infrastructure for these things. And so I'd be careful of machine learning. I'd be very careful of all the VR content, which I think is really exciting, but it's just like there's so much money there, especially here in LA, relative to the number of users right now. So there's exciting industries, but you gotta watch out because a lot of stuff's not gonna work.
That's good advice. We have a few minutes left before the end of our session, and I wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to open it up to those of you in the audience who've come to hear Joe. Is there anybody who has a question for Joe or would like to debate his views on the world? Yes.
I was going to say, a funny question for both of you. Are large companies focused enough on cybersecurity now, and what should they be focused on currently?
I'm involved in a couple of things in that space. I think they are a lot more focused on it now. I think the boards especially realize this is a serious risk. And I mean, I think the most important thing to do there is it's possible to kind of remap your internal rules engine. I think it's a really important way of approaching it, in my opinion. So right now, most large companies still have like 200,000 rules in their firewall about what can come in and what can come out. And there's no person that understands it. It's just like stuff that's been built up over time. And I think making the rules a lot more clear and simple and just say what can talk to what and how it works and really walling off things internally in the right way. Basically assume attackers are going to break in and then protect yourself intelligently. And there's different companies in this space doing that. I'm very bullish on Illumio and what they're doing. I've been involved with them for a long time, and they're the fastest growing company I know in the space that's helping companies do things like that.
Yeah, we're going to have a session at 2:30 this afternoon on cybersecurity with 4 really outstanding experts, and we're going to get into that topic. But as someone who sits on the boards of several of these companies and ran another company that was a couple of $1 billion a year into cybersecurity as a business area, I would tell you 5 years ago, most directors were clueless. Today, there's no director that doesn't know it's an issue, but there are companies with different degrees of awareness, preparedness. Amazingly enough, there are some very high-level companies that did not really have their act together. They might be companies that say, we have a distributed business model, we operate around the world, we rely upon each business unit to have their own IT guy, their own security guy, and everything's going to be fine. And the answer is, it's not going to be fine. And even if you have a distributed business model, you have to think about centralized responsibility control rules, and a CISO, which is a name of which 5 years ago many directors didn't even know what a chief information security officer was or did. Today, if you don't have that function, you're going to be in trouble. Yeah, there's a question here.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting presentation. I'd love to hear your perspective on healthcare and opportunities you see there, life sciences, and 2, your perspective on getting liquidity for these tech companies during the IPO.
Yeah, sure. Well, the latter one, I guess, has been a big issue for a lot of people with Palantir. I would like them to go public, and they probably won't go for another 2 or 3 years or whatnot. And I think most of our companies were involved in. They have a responsibility to go public when they hit a certain point. And I think you are going to see a window where a lot more go out the next 2 or 3 years. So I know a lot are planning on, but I agree it's a major issue in the space. There are a lot of ways to get liquidity on the secondary markets now, which have become a lot more mature. And I think one of the things we're working on is to try to get companies to agree to release data in the right way, even though they're still private. Because I think it's irresponsible not to release data to have a fair secondary market. So that's an issue we're talking a lot about in Silicon Valley. In terms of healthcare, on my side, there's really a couple areas. I mean, I guess I've only really learned about this the last 5 years or so I'm not the leading expert. There's a lot of bankers here who are probably smarter than me. It seems like the most money by far is in pharma in terms of you just like map out the space. And so one of the things I'm really excited about is where you get consumer choice and you get pharma being able to advertise to consumer choice. Because if you look at pharma, they have the most money and they spend more money on marketing than anything else. And right now there's no digital marketing pretty much because there's not that much consumer choice. But you've just in the last couple of years created a lot of different ways where you have platforms where consumers are making buying decisions. And so I'm very, very bullish on that area as a new theme. Blink Health is the one that I'm betting on there most now, which is growing quickly, but I think there's probably going to be others as well. And then the more interesting area of healthcare to me is the life science IT overlap. You're actually sitting next to one of the great entrepreneurs in that space, so you should talk to her about it.
We have time for maybe a couple more questions. Yes? Could you stand up and speak a little louder, please?
About the advice to entrepreneurs, you introduced the answer by saying you have a couple of advice and you only give one, so can you have a couple?
Did everybody hear the question?
Apparently, I said there's two, and I only gave one. So the reason I kind of ended up combining them, but I guess that the 2 points I was trying to make is focus on what you're passionate about and surround yourself with as many bright people as you can. And the biggest mistake people make when they're building these companies is they get going and they get focused and they forget to try to spend time recruiting other really top people. Because my view on these things, also as an investor who's trying to help, is no matter how good I think I am, if I could find five more amazing people who could do great things, that's going to be better than anything I could do. So just keep that in mind as working
If I
on
could
talent.
just put an add on that from my experience working with companies like this, scaling is a huge issue once you get past the initial point where you clearly have a company, it's got something magic, it's the it company, smart people, and then as you try and take it to the next level, we often see companies that people cannot scale uniformly. In the company.
We call it bringing in the adults.
Bringing in the adults, yeah. But not too many of them. One more question before we break.
Are we scared them away?
Okay, one more question.
We will be putting together our fourth fund at the end of this year. Right now we're not. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. Our time is up. Joe?
Thanks, Ron.
That's great. Enjoyed it. Yeah, that worked.